Hi there and welcome to Studio SN. My name is Sara Naumann and today we're collaging with Eclectica Stamps. I designed my Eclectica stamps for PaperArtsy to be used in a couple of different ways, and the first is to simply take any of the elements, stamp them on your card or your journal page or your home decor item and be ready to go. The second way I'd like you to think about these stamps is as collage elements, so that you can stamp any of the quotes or the smaller accent pieces and create your own collages. You can also take some of the larger elements here, stamp them, cut them apart, and rearrange them to create your own unique look, which is what we've done with the card that we're going to be working on today. So you can see here I've not only got a really cool brayered background, I've also got some reverse stenciling going on here in the middle, which I'll show you. But then I also have this really fun collage focal element, which is actually this collage element right here, but it's been stamped, embossed, and cut apart and rearranged, including some of the other elements on the stamp sheet to create a completely unique collage. Let's begin with our background, which is a really simple paint brayering technique that you can see here using two of my favorite colors. So the tools that you'll need to have on hand, first of all, of course, a small rubber brayer, and this is one from Ranger. I'm also going to have two different paints on hand. So I'm working with the Fresco Finish chalk acrylic paints, and I've got some of my favorite colors. Number one, Caribbean Sea, or Caribbean Sea, depending on how you pronounce it, and also Limelight. Two of these together are going to create a really beautiful and fresh contemporary look on here. Now, one thing to point out about these paints, they are really highly pigmented. They're beautiful colors, but they're also slightly different. So you'll notice here the Caribbean Sea is an opaque paint, and you can tell by that little swatch on there as well as the label. The Limelight is a translucent paint, and you can even see on the swatch on the front of the label here. So just two things to keep in mind. You're going to get a really highly opaque coverage with Caribbean Sea, and then of course the Limelight is going to add just a really nice glow sort of on top of that. So I'm going to have an overlapping section here in the middle of my cardstock, but then allowing both of those colors to stand alone as well. So I'm going to grab a piece of cardstock, set aside my card, and I'm also going to bring in a bit of scrap paper here too. Pop down my cardstock, and I'm going to start with a Caribbean Sea. And what I'm going to do is just squeeze a little bit of this just directly onto my cardstock. Grab the brayer and then roll out that color. Now, what I like to do when I'm brayering my color is just to allow some of the white to show through there so it's not entirely covered. But you can see the beautiful opacity of that Caribbean Sea. Now I'm going to clean off the brayer a little bit here too, so I'm not working with color in color. And then I'll come back with the Limelight and do the same process. So I'll just add a little bit here on the side and roll that color out. Now you'll see on here that not only am I getting some beautiful Limelight and the beautiful Caribbean Sea, but I've also got a gorgeous blending here in the center of those two colors. Now all I need to do is let this dry, and while this is drying, I can be doing my stenciling. The stenciling technique I'm going to show you for the middle ground of my card is actually a reverse stenciling effect. So I'll show you the stencil and then I'll explain what I mean. So this is the one that I'm using. This is also from PaperArtsy, and this is the PS101 stencil. Lots of really cool funky dots in here. Now if you're to stencil this as it is, you would end up with a polka dot effect. But as you can see on here, I'm actually getting the outlines of the circles rather than the circles themselves. And this is a really simple technique and a great way to get double use out of a lot of your stencils. So again, let me put aside the card and bring back in my scrap piece of paper here and my stencil. And rather than having a piece of cardstock underneath, in this case, I'm just working directly onto the scrap paper, and I'm going to take some of the Zesty Zing and give this a little bit of a shake. And then what I'm going to do is squeeze a little bit here on my scrap paper, and I'm going to grab this brayer once again and roll it directly onto the stencil. And I'm rolling this on rather than squeezing it on here because I want to have a nice even coverage. I don't want to have any blobs or glops on here. Those are technical terms, by the way, blobs and glops. So now that I've got my stencil painted yellow, I'm going to bring in a little bit of water and just give a light misting. Then I'm going to take my cardstock and place it on top and gently press this to get a print of the design. So when I'm pressing this on here, I'm holding down one area and then pressing on the rest of the area so it doesn't slide around. And then I can just lift this up and you can see that I've got a really cool outline design rather than the dot design of the stencil. So now all I need to do is let this dry, and while I'm doing that, I can get ready to do some stamping. Now that my embossing powder is melted and I've got my partially embossed image on here, I can start cutting this apart to use in my collage. So you'll notice the embossing powder is just on those two leaves, a little bit got on this focal image, which is just fine. So I'll be cutting this apart, but I also wanted to show you another portion of that collage. Now we've looked at this large element, but another part that I've stamped is this pre-collaged element on here too. And this is the quote that says, "If you are falling, dive." That's from Joseph Campbell. I think that's a really cool sentiment. But what I want is not the sentiment in this case, but I want the string of numbers here, and I also want this small postmark. Now this small postmark is actually the same as this large postmark that you see up here. That's, again, so I wanted you to have a variety of elements that you can use together to create your own collage. So I've stamped that sentiment onto a piece of cardstock that I've also brayered with the Fresco Finish chalk acrylics. First I brayered on the bougainvillea, which you'll notice is a semi-opaque paint, and then I went over the top of it with the Zesty Zing. So in the same technique that we used way at the beginning of this video was used to create this background. And then I've stamped that element on here. I've also stamped the rectangular postmark. So then I can start cutting out all of these elements and building up my collage. So I'm going to move these aside. I won't bore you with the actual cutting out. That's not the fun part of the video. And I'm gonna start again with my base piece of my reverse stenciled element. And I can start placing some of my collage elements down here. So let me get all of these little parts and pieces here. And I'm going to start with the leaves. Now they're kind of spread out in the original collage, but for this case, I want to have them overlapping and be closer together. So I'll put those two here, and then I'm going to overlap that with my postmark. So already I've got something very, very different, which is really cool. Now I've also got my little postmark here, the rectangular one. I'm going to tuck that underneath, and then I'm going to take this little string of numbers and put that down here. So you'll notice that I'm starting at the center and working my way out from side to side. I'm also creating a lot of balance in between my vertical lines and my horizontal lines, as well as circular shapes and more linear shapes, as well as some organic shapes like these leaves, which are kind of in between linear and circular. Now I've also got this little guy here, and I put him up on foam tape in the original card, but for now I'm just going to set that down here. Again, I've also got some overlapping going on, which is a really nice collage principle, one to keep in mind. All of your elements, keeping them together and slightly overlapping really creates a nice unified element as one. So I've got all of my parts and pieces together. I've got some postmarks, I've got some numbers, I've got a lot of a really nice contrast on here. Let me bring back in my original card and we can take a look at the overall collage here. And you'll notice that not only do I have the balance of these elements, I also have a nice balance in terms of texture. So I have the rough texture of that embossing powder. I also have the smooth texture. This is some vintage silk ribbon. And I've also got a little bit rougher texture with the hemp twine that I've got going on here. Now I've also got some more texture here, which I've got a metal embellishment. And I'm going to show you this process really quickly because this is another cool way to add texture to your card. So I'm going to slide this aside and bring in my piece of scrap cardstock and my metal charm. Now what I would do with this is simply take that charm, and I've got my embossing powder on hand and my embossing ink as well. And all I'm going to do is take this rather filthy embossing ink and just simply press this on here. Press it directly onto the metal. And then what I'll do, scoot this aside, and I'm just going to sprinkle on some of this vintage champagne embossing powder. I'm not trying to coat the entire piece, I just want it to have a little bit of that shine on there. And then what I would do, grab some tweezers and hook those on here to heat set this. You don't want to try and hold this in your hands because this will get really, really hot. But after you heat set it, you will have an element that looks just like this one, which is a really cool way to add some more texture and contrast and combination with your elements on your card. So this is how to create a unique collage with Eclectica Stamps and Stencils. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thank you so much for joining me on Studio SN. If you like this video, I invite you to subscribe to Studio SN on YouTube, and I'll keep you updated with new videos every month. For more ideas and inspiration, please stop by my website at saranaumann.com. Again, thank you for joining me on Studio SN, and I'll see you again next time.